Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world today. Thank you for tuning in. Allow me to start with a quick introduction of myself and what we're going to be talking about today. I spent 22 years working for companies like the ones you see on the screen. My last corporate job was Chief Learning Officer of Morgan Stanley, based in New York. About 7 years ago, I decided to call it quits with the corporate world and become a full-time student of leadership and human behavior, and I came to Malaysia to head up a not-for-profit organization called the Eclipse Leadership and Governance Center, where I've been since. During this time, I've written a few books. I've been writing regularly for Forbes and some other magazines and articles, and most recently, I've written a new book called Open Source Leadership, which is what we're going to be talking about today. I will get an indication on my screen if you raise your hand, if you press the button on your screens, whether you're agreeing with me or not. So raise your hand, in other words, press the button if you believe that in the last 5 to 7 years alone, technology has changed our lives so dramatically that nothing is normal anymore, both in personal or professional lives. And I can see that everybody here is agreeing. Okay. Now, raise your hand or press the button if you believe that large companies are keeping up with that change, particularly when it comes to managing and leading people. And I don't see a single light tick off, which means none of you are pressing the button on your screen. Well, that's what open source leadership is all about. What exactly has changed? How much is actually yet to unfold? And more importantly, how organizations need to lead and manage in this world of constant change. So let's get started. Let's first look at what today's world is all about. One aspect of today's world is this. We call this uber connected. Everything and everyone is super connected 24/7. So this uber connectivity is changing a lot of things. Let's look at what this uber connectivity is doing. Knowledge and information has been Googled. Taxis, Ubered. Communication, WhatsApped, Twittered, or Messengers. Memories, Instagrammed. And life and relationships have been Facebooked. I will never understand why when two people who are in love are living together, when they wake up on the same bed, and if it's one of their birthdays, before wishing them a happy birthday, the person will go on Facebook on their phone and write a post to happy birthday to the best wife or husband in the world. I love you so much. She's everything to me, blah, blah, blah. And after the post has been put up, then maybe he will look at her, hug her, and say, happy birthday, darling. Similarly, work has been Bangalored, and employees are becoming free agents. About 40% of the US workforce, by some estimates, are already free agents. So that's what 24/7 connectivity is doing. Another way of looking at it is this. In 1990, the top 3 automakers in Detroit had a total combined market cap of $36 billion. They produced about $250 billion in revenue between the 3 of them, and they employed about 1.2 million people. Fast forward to 2014, and the top 3 Silicon Valley companies today have a combined market cap of $1.09 trillion. They make about the same kind of revenue, but they employ about 1/10 of the employees. And according to Klaus Schwab, the convener of the World Economic Forum, he says that the fact that so much wealth can be created with so few people is because in the digital economy, marginal cost of production tends towards 0. Now, what he's saying is very important because you can imagine, if you're in the business of selling software, the moment you sell the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th unit of the same software, marginal cost is nearly 0, isn't it? But get this. Going forward, even marginal cost of manufacturing is going to come to 0 thanks to Uber connectivity. Why? Let's take an example. So let's say you want to buy a pair of shoes, right? Today you have 2 options. You go to the mall, you go to a few shoe stores, you try on a few shoes, like the one, pay for it with a credit card, bring a box home, right? Or if you know exactly the shoe you want, you go to Zappos.com or your favorite website, order the shoe, pay with your credit card, and a few days later, a box arrives at your home. Well, get this. In not too distant a future, you will go online. Not only will you select your shoe, you will actually make your shoe. You will design your shoe. I want pink laces on one side. I want green laces on the other side. I want extra padding under my right heel because it hurts while I walk, etc., etc. You will pay for it using something other than a credit card, I can tell you that. And eventually, instead of a box arriving in your home a few days later, what you're going to get, perhaps a few hours later, is a link on your email. You will click on that link and your shoe will print on your 3D printer at home. So even marginal costs of manufacturing are going to tend towards zero. That's what Uber connectivity is beginning to do for us. The second part of today's world looks like this. It's made of people. And by 2061, we are going to 10 billion people. It's called Uber populated. So Uber population is a good thing, right? Because there's so many more consumers, there's so much more need for products and services, and that's why they call it the Asian century, because a lot of these people are going to be born in Asia, because it's one region where population is still growing. Exciting growth opportunities. For example, poultry consumption. America, with 300 million people, consumes 9 billion birds a year. Asia, with 13 times the people, consumes only 16 billion birds a year. Can you imagine how poultry companies are looking at Asia as the Asian century and the market for poultry? Same is the case with energy consumption. But my favorite one is this. Guess how many cars do every 1,000 Americans own? So between every 1,000 Americans, how many cars do they own? Yes, you got that right. It's about 800. What do you think the number is in China? Well, it's 200. And the number in India is only 50. So now can you see how auto companies are looking at Asia and salivating? China is already the world's biggest auto market. India's luxury goods market is 350 million consumers, more than the entire population of the US. India is a strange country. It's the richest country in the world in this sense, and also the poorest country in the world if you look at the sheer numbers of people below poverty line. So at long last, Asia's time has come, hence it is the Asian century, right? So exciting opportunities. But what nobody's talking about is the other side of the Asian century, which is the daunting challenges. Get this, 6 out of the 7.5 billion of us have mobile phones, but only 4.5 billion of us have access to a toilet, and most of these toiletless people are in Asia. Hundreds of millions of people do not have access to clean drinking water, and I'm told that almost 1 in 2 hospital beds is occupied because of a waterborne disease. If we don't do something really drastic about the way we manage this, it's going to mean drastic consequences for planet Earth. So, welcome to the 21st century, which is Uber connected and Uber populated. Connectivity of people and things is obliterating business models before you can say Jack Robinson. There are exciting opportunities and daunting challenges, but there is breakneck speed. There is absolutely no place for anybody that is slow today. Total transparency. Everything is open, everything is connected. Ordinary people are more empowered than ever before. Today, the smartphone that most people carry in their pockets has more computing power than a computer as big as this room from 20 years ago. And they can destroy anybody's reputation within minutes on social media. Leaders, on the other hand, are totally exposed and naked. So that's the reality. Exciting opportunities, daunting challenges, ordinary people totally empowered, breakneck speed, leaders totally exposed and naked. And this is only the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's unfolding. The 21st century is very, very different from the 20th. Amidst everything that's changing all around us, there is one thing, however, that has remained constant for the last 100 years and will probably remain constant in the next few. And that is called the 80-20 rule, or the Pareto principle. Basically, the 80-20 rule says that 20% of the causes create 80% of the effects, right? So in management, it is 20% of the people produce 80% of the results. In sales, it's 20% of the salespeople produce 80% of the sales, 20% of your customers produce 80% of your complaints. This rule was discovered in 1906 by Vilfredo Pareto when he noticed in Italy that 80% of the land and 80% of the wealth belong to 20% of Italians. And then he found it true to be in almost every walk of life. In management, what this translates to is the infamous bell curve. Basically, which says that in any group of people or in any organization, there will be 20% who are top performers, 60% who are average performers, and 20% who are bottom performers. So this distribution does not change. Now, I worked in some of the Fortune 500 companies where they hire the best of the best people on day zero from the best campuses, and they told me that, in our organization there is no bell curve because everybody is a high performer, because everybody is from Harvard or from Stanford or from everywhere else. How can you have a bell curve? And my humble submission to them was always, no, you will still have a bell curve, because even though everybody is from Harvard and Stanford, not everybody is going to perform at the same level. Your curve may be higher, but you will still have a bell curve. So this is never going to change. In the light of all these changes and this one constant, what this book really talks about is these three things. What is leadership in the 21st century? And how can organizations develop leaders in the digital age? Second, because we live in the age of breakneck speed, how can we innovate quickly and more often? And finally, this whole idea about human motivation. How can we, in an age of freedom and empowerment, really look at motivation, and how can we measure it, and how can we put that motivation to work? So those are the three things that I'm going to talk about. And that's what the book details out. So let's get going. The first part, leadership in the 21st century. Let me begin by telling you what's not leadership. Here are some traditional notions about leadership. For over 100 years, we have been confusing followership with leadership. Now that may sound surprising to you, but it's absolutely true. As parents, we love our children when they listen to us and obey, and we don't like them when they're too rebellious or ask too many questions or are too independent. We often punish them or whack them into submission, and then when they become obedient, we reward them. So right from then, we are rewarding followership behavior in the name of leadership. Then when you go to school and college, who are the teacher's pets? If you guessed, it is the ones that listen to and do exactly what they're told, you'll be 100% right. Yeah, I'll never forget when I went to MBA school, I took an elective in international relations. So the course was about the balance of power between the US and the then USSR. Our professor had a very unique take on this balance of power. He thought that the US was scared and afraid of Russia, but none of us agreed with him. We didn't believe him. We thought it didn't gel with us, and we told him so. And when it came to write the term paper on which we were going to be graded for that course, our professor, however, was very nice. He said, listen, I don't need you to repeat everything you've heard in class. I will not penalize you for your political opinion, so please write what you think was the actual balance of power. What I am interested in is looking at your reasoning and your analysis. And again, I will not penalize you for your political opinion. We said, well, a nice guy, he allows us to think. And that's what the whole thing is all about. And the night before the exam, I was talking to a senior who had taken this course last year, and told him my plan, and he says, are you crazy? Don't listen to a word of what Paul said. Write exactly what you heard in class. Well, I followed the advice, and I got an A grade. But I was only one of 2 people that got an A grade. All those people who thought and wrote independently got B's, C's, and D's. So again, in school and college, we reward followership behavior and call it leadership. Well, now you're a manager in a large company, and if you have an employee engagement survey, and if a part of your bonus or your compensation depends on your cut of the employee engagement survey, guess what you do? You learn very quickly that you need to please your people. You learn very quickly that you need to postpone tough decisions, particularly around survey time. You become a pleaser. And when I checked the dictionary the last time, pleasing was a form of followership, not leadership. Well, now you're a CEO, and you go to your board and you present a brave new vision, a brave new strategy that's going to be changing the world, and you ask for funding. What is the first question the board asks? If you're thinking, how much is the funding? That's the second question the board asks. The first question the board asks is, where is the McKinsey report which shows that 10 best practice companies have already done it? If they have, here's your funding. If you're the only one talking about it, we'll have to think about this some more. Again, from being children at home all the way to the boardroom, we reward followership behavior and call it leadership. That is not leadership. And that is why the $80 billion a year industry of leadership development is not working, is not producing more leaders, because what we're doing is creating more followers. Next, we've been equating a position of power as leadership. So the moment somebody wins an election, we call them a leader. The moment somebody is appointed to the C-suite, we call them a leader. But is position and leadership the same thing? Isn't it true that when you get appointed to a big position or elected to a big position, you become a boss, not necessarily a leader? But we think that anybody in a position of power is the leader, and there is a problem. We think that leadership is about using your position power to influence others. No, as you will learn later on, leadership has nothing to do with position power. Think about the three greatest examples of leadership in the last century. And I'll go from west to east. Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi. What did these people not have? No position, power, title, or office for much of their lives. And yet they are the three greatest examples of leadership from our previous century. What does that tell us about the need to influence others and using position power to do so? Another misconception about leadership is that leaders are born, not made. Well, I spent 2 years of my life trying to prove that leadership was genetic, leadership was hereditary, and I failed miserably. Why did I want to prove it? Because if leaders were indeed born, if it was all God-given, well, then we should shut down the $80 billion a year industry and I would get a Nobel Prize in economics, but I failed. We concluded after those 2 years that only a very small portion of leadership ability was inborn or natural talent, if you will. Bulk of it was made, and I'll explain that more as I go along. And finally, this idea based on which the entire leadership industry is based is that leadership can be learned through competency models, best practice case studies, role plays, etc. You go to any business school today on a leadership course, if it's a week-long course or a 4-week course, all you will do is read and discuss case study after case study after case study and listen to the word best practice in every third sentence. Well, in 2017, looking in the rearview mirror for clues on how to behave for the future does not work. Unfortunately, my friends, none of this is leadership. It is the 21st century. It is the uber-connected and uber-populated era, and we need to think differently about what leadership is today and going forward. So to understand what leadership really is, let me introduce you to a modern-day leader. At the age of 19, he started Napster. Basically, he hacked into our music files and allowed us to share them with everybody, and it was shut down by court order. Later on, he hacked into people's contact management systems and started something called Plaxo, which also didn't do too well. But he tasted first success in 2004 when he became the first president of Facebook and created its first user interface. Today, he runs the official version of Napster, Spotify, which we all, many of us love. He recently also created something called Brigade, which was a social network for politics trying to educate Americans on how to exercise their right to vote. Recently, he's also launched something called the Screening Room, whereby now he's hacking into the world of cinema. If you're willing to spend $50 using a set-top box, you can watch a new film, first day, first show, right in your living room as long as you don't mind paying $50. Right? Some people are saying that's going to be the death of cinema. Some people are going to say that's the only thing that's going to save the industry. The jury is still out. But as you can see, he's hacking all through. And now he's hacking into the secretive world of cancer research. And he's put in a lot of his own money to create something called PICE, where he's literally forcing several of the top cancer research institutes to share their research at different stages. Why? So that cures and medication can come to market quicker, cheaper, better, and faster. So who is this? Some of you probably have guessed it. Yes, it is Sean Parker. He's only 38 years old right now. So whether it was Sean Parker or any of these people, the question is, what are these people trying to do? Are they just trying to make money? Well, of course they're trying to make money, but is that the only thing they're trying to do? Well, the answer is a big no. What they are trying to do is create a tomorrow that is better than today for themselves and for the people around them. That, my friends, is the definition of leadership. Leadership is a burning desire to create a better future deep inside you. It's a feeling in the gut that I have to create a better future. Yeah? So that is leadership is not a title, it's not a position, it's not a competency model, it's not a best practice case study, it's certainly not a personality test or any of those things that the leadership development industry wants you to believe. Leadership at the end of the day is a mindset, it is a burning desire deep inside your gut to want to create a better future. Now, I've spent perhaps 20 minutes selling you this idea and this vision for life and leadership, that leadership is the art of creating a better future. But I'm going to say something strange now. Believe what you see on the screen at your own risk. Yeah, you heard that right. Believe what you see on the screen at your own risk. Why would I say something as bizarre as that after selling this idea to you? Well, what happens when you tell people around you, hey, come, join me, let's create a better future? In other words, hey, join me, let's create change. Do you get a lot of support immediately? No, quite the opposite, isn't it? You get things like, are you crazy? It's never going to work. Get out of here. Get a life. Are you crazy? It's not going to work. And if you don't listen and get started, all you get is resistance. Active resistance, passive resistance, all kinds of resistance. Anybody that has tried to change anything knows what I'm talking about. So the point is that the constant companion of leadership, as seen this way, is resistance, resistance, and resistance. So if resistance is the constant companion of leadership, the key question is, what is the main ingredient of leadership? What do you need a ton of inside you in order to not give up? Because after all, the difference between a leader and a non-leader is simply this. Non-leaders give up in the face of that resistance. Now, you're probably thinking you need tenacity, you need resilience, you need faith, you need belief, you need stamina, and all of those things. And all of those things would be right. If I may take editorial license for a minute, the word I'd like to use is energy. You need a tremendous amount of long-lasting energy, intrinsic energy, in order to not give up. It is the kind of energy that Nelson Mandela had through 27 years of prison. It is the kind of energy that Soichiro Honda had over 20 years, almost 20 years of failure before he was able to make the Honda Motor Company a success. You know, his factory was bombed, he was bankrupted a few times, he had to pawn his wife's jewelry, but the one thing he didn't do, he never gave up over a long, long period of time. I'm talking about this kind of long-lasting energy. So let's complete our definition of leadership. Leadership is the art of harnessing human energy towards the creation of a better future. You have to make a choice to lead because it will involve a huge amount of struggle. But as long as you have discovered that long-lasting energy, you're going to make that choice. You may be going to work every day, you may be doing a great job, your boss or manager might be really happy with you, you may be even getting good bonuses for all the work that you're doing for your company, but unless you are in the business of creating a better future, unless you have closed your eyes and imagined a better future and are working, struggling hard towards it, you're not leading yet. So again, what is the key to leadership is to find that long-lasting energy. Now, recently, I was with a large audience in Palo Alto giving a talk, and I said to them, well, in America, when you're driving from one city to the other, and if you're tired, you pull up in the rest area and you buy a little bottle called 5-Hour Energy. You drink it, it peps you up, and then you drive for a few more hours. Well, I'm not talking about 5-hour energy here. What I'm talking about here is 27-year energy. Again, the energy that Nelson Mandela had through 27 years of wrongful imprisonment, and he still didn't give up. So the question is, how do you get that 27-year energy? I wish I had a role play, a best practice case study, a formula to give you, but there is no such thing. What you're going to have to do to find it is to answer some key questions. Personal leadership energy begins by getting 100% clear about your set of values, those principles, those values that are so important to you that you never give up on them no matter what the cost. Yeah, and that's the key word. You don't give up on those values no matter what. You live them 24/7, 365. Very few people are so clear about their values that they take every step in life based on those values. But that is the key. For Gandhi and Mandela, non-violence, forgiveness, etc. were not just convenient buzzwords. They lived by them every day, every month, every year of their life, no matter what the cost to them or to their loved ones, because that determines who you are. Now, as you get that deep awareness about your values, day-to-day life happens to you. And energy is produced in your body at the intersection of those values and day-to-day situations. What I mean is that there are only two kinds of situations in life, right? Experiences. Either something is a match between your values and whatever's happening, you are going to get positive energy like joy and happiness and excitement. or there is a mismatch, something is against your values, you're going to get angry or sad, which is negative energy. But whether positive or negative, energy is produced at that intersection of your values and life situation. So if you don't know what your values are at a deep, honest level, you're not going to be able to recognize, leave alone measure the energy. Because to become a great leader, you need to be able to measure what energy you have for what situations, because you're going to have to choose one of those things and make it your life's purpose. And once you have a values-based purpose, you lose fear, and once you lose fear, you can do anything. That's how you get 27-year energy, by answering these two basic tenets, these two basic questions about life. What are my values that I'm never going to compromise no matter what? And what is a values-based purpose that I can give to myself that I will strive for as long as I live? Once you have that, you have long-lasting leadership energy. And this is what most business schools don't cover. And this is what we talk a lot about in this book. Yeah? So what are your values? What is your purpose? Do you have one? Something to think about. So that was personal leadership energy. What we also look at is organizational leadership energy. Have you ever wondered why different companies in the same industry, in the same market conditions, some of them do incredibly well for long periods of time and some fizzle out? What's the difference? We found that senior leadership teams that focus on 3 elements of organizational leadership energy throughout the year create more long-lasting success. What are those 3 elements of organizational leadership energy? Well, we call them brains, bones, and nerves. I don't particularly cover that in open source leadership, but this is now me taking you back to Too Many Bosses, Too Few Leaders, where brains, bones, and nerves is explained more fully, but I'd like to talk about it just for a few minutes here because there's a connection. So the brains of a business is nothing but vision, mission, and strategy, and that becomes your organizational purpose. The bones is people, process, and structure, which is the organizational architecture. The nerves is the culture, which is the organizational values. Leaders must actually try to maximize the overlap between the personal leadership energy of all employees and organizational leadership energy, which they shape through managing the brains, bones, and nerves, because that overlap is the leadership energy sweet spot. And whether the organization is going to be successful for the long term and whether employees are going to be highly engaged depends on the size of the sweet spot, and therefore it is the job of top management to maximize that sweet spot. So that is how we look at leadership in the 21st century. Why must leadership be defined in terms of leadership energy? Because we have exciting opportunities and daunting challenges that history has never seen before. So leadership energy must come before competency development. Deep reflection before formulaic action. Why before what? One mistake that a lot of people make today is that action means results, and therefore multitasking is the norm. No, in order to go fast in today's day of breakneck speed, what we are suggesting is you slow down and create moments of silent reflection in your day in order to regain your breath and your thinking so that you can move faster. And finally, emotional integrity before emotional intelligence. What are my values? Be super honest with yourself. There's lots of literature, lots of programs, lots of advice on how to build your EQ, but nobody talks about emotional integrity, which is the courage to look in the mirror and ask yourself, this is what I want for myself, and I don't care what society says. You know who we are the most dishonest with in our lives? Ourselves. I'll give you an example. So in our research, we ask a lot of questions and collect data from around the world, right? One of the questions we always ask is, what is the most important thing in your life? What do you care about the most? Can you guess, in any part of the world, with any audience, what is the most popular answer to that question? Yeah, you got that right. I call it the F word, family. Family is the most important thing for me. Well, why do I call it the F word? I'm joking, of course. Because for a lot of people, even though they say family is the most important thing, it's not true. So why do they say it if it's not true? Well, because it's the societally correct thing to say. Oh, you said family, what a nice person. You're a family person. I can trust you. You must have the right values. Oh, for you, money and power at any cost is more important. Boo, be careful. Right? So we all say family. But emotional integrity says you must not deny yourself what you really want, because unless you can make yourself happy, you cannot make other people happy. You cannot be a leader unless you have full emotional integrity. You cannot experience happiness or real success unless you have 100% emotional integrity. So in the book, I talk a lot more about what is emotional integrity and how do you go about it, but just keep that in mind. Right? So that's on leadership in the 21st century. Let's now move on to creating innovation and breakthrough success. And the first question I'd like to deal with is, what style of leadership is better suited for creating breakthrough innovation in today's age of empowerment, freedom, and speed? Why did we even think about this question? Well, very interestingly, you go to any bookstore and pick up books on leadership, and book after book, literature after literature, glorifies this idea of democratic, all-inclusive leadership. Particularly, they say that you want to have an innovation culture in your organization, you better be democratic, you better be all-inclusive. Whereas in real life, you see Steve Jobs, you see Elon Musk, you see Jeff Bezos, you see people from history. They were all those who rocked the history of the world were autocrats. So what's true? All the leadership literature, or what we see going on throughout history and even today in the business world? Well, we decided to check. And this is where we started a huge 28-country research project, which is all detailed in the book. And we asked people in 28 countries, about 16,000 people. The first question we asked was, what do great leaders have in common? So we showed them pictures and profiles of these leaders that you're looking at in the screen, some business leaders, some society leaders, some today, some yesterday. And we gave them a list of 11 attributes to choose from and asked them to select the top 3 commonalities. Now, of the 11 attributes, 5 of them were democratic, all-inclusive, I love you all behaviors. Those are the pink ones on your screen. The blue ones are the autocratic, my way or the highway behaviors. And number 11 is a mix of both. And we asked them to choose the top 3. Guess which ones, the pink ones or the blue ones, ended up at the top of the list in every single of our 28 countries without any exception? Yes, the blue ones. Those are the global results. Surprising, isn't it? What this says, perhaps, is that while we love to idealize democratic leadership, we've actually secretly been admiring autocratic leaders all along throughout history. We said, wow, this is disturbing. Is this the message we want to give, that be an autocrat? Does this mean that you have license to kill anybody 007, anybody that doesn't agree with you, shoot? Well, not so fast. First, we said, let's check this again. So we asked another question. What do business leaders today need to do most in order to drive unprecedented success and breakthrough innovation? Same 11 factors, again the same results, all the blue ones right at the top. Whoa, can this be true? Well, let's ask it another way, and we asked a third question, this time a yes-no question. Is a significant amount of top-down, bold, autocratic leadership required in order to achieve breakthrough results? Look, 75% of our 16,000 people from 28 countries agreed or strongly agreed. Basically, what we're saying here is, while we idealize democratic leadership, what we really want is somebody telling us the way forward. If you look at the results by country, every single country voted in favor of autocratic leadership without any exceptions. The green bars that you see on the screen are strongly agree or agree. Not a single exception. But there is a problem, which is the 21st century leadership dilemma. What is the 21st century leadership dilemma? Well, let's look at it. We are looking at breakneck speed, total transparency, everything is open, ordinary people really empowered, leaders are totally exposed and naked. The question is, when leaders are totally exposed and naked in an environment where everybody is social media enabled, how can anyone be an autocratic leader even if they wanted to be? The 2011 Arab Spring and many other recent examples have told us that force is not even an option anymore. So on the one hand, data is saying that you need to be autocratic in order to drive breakthrough innovation more frequently and quickly. On the other hand, today's people, empowered people, will not let you. You look at the recent presidential election in the United States, and both candidates, every misspoken word, every misdeed ever conducted in their lives was out in the open. That's what I mean by leaders are totally exposed and naked. How can you be autocratic? At some point, society is going to kick you out, isn't it? So how do we solve for this dilemma, particularly in the business world? That's the key. And if you read the book carefully enough, you'll find that the way to do that is to practice the 5 keys of positive autocracy. You have to earn the right to use autocratic leadership, and the way to do that is to live your values and follow your values-based purpose all the time. Build the reputation for being a better future creator. Once people begin to trust you, once people begin to see you living those values 24/7 no matter what, once people believe in your purpose, they will give you their trust and give you the right to be autocratic. That's the first key. The second, you have to literally get good at the dance of the naked autocrat. What is the dance of the naked autocrat? Basically, you have to be autocratic about your values and your purpose. Those are non-negotiable. Whatever happens, these are the values and this is the purpose, right? At the same time, be compassionate and humble with people all the time. So that's the dance of the naked autocrat. You have to balance those two seemingly opposite things, but that's the dilemma and that's the challenge of 21st century leadership. Lee Kuan Yew, the former Prime Minister and founder of Singapore, says it best. He says, if there was a good reason why it is no, it must remain a no, but the man must be told politely. You lose nothing by being polite. Now, the economic miracle of tiny Singapore was largely attributed to this man's vision, and he was a non-autocrat. But people not only listened to him in Singapore, they worshipped him. Why? Because he had earned the right to be autocratic, because he was really good at the dance of the naked autocrat. Number 3, give them freedom within a framework. So as companies become bigger, there are more rules, there are more policies that are written. So if you look at a framework in which business is done, on the one axis you have values, on the other axis you have rules. What most organizations tend to become over time as they grow in size is this. The letter of the law, rules, 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 policies, 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 are the ones which rule and govern everything that is done. I was recently consulting with a company and I said, why do you do this? Say, it's our policy. Why is it your policy? So I don't know, it's our policy. The point is, in today's day of breakneck speed, rules get outdated before the ink dries on them. So if you just put people in boxes called rules, policies, procedures, they will not be able to win in the marketplace. Of course, there are basic rules that you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't kill, you shouldn't cheat. Agreed, but you cannot have so many rules that totally stifle the organization. Instead, what you need to do is build a culture in your organization where spirit of the law rules. In other words, values-based behavior and values-based decision making. So I am in a situation trying to negotiate a deal for my company. As long as I am upholding the values of my company, even if I have to sidestep a rule, it should be okay. Because after all, where do rules come from? They come from values, don't they? That's what we call freedom within the framework, and leaders have to work hard towards building that culture of values-based decision-making and values-based behavior. Because if values are upheld, everything ought to be okay. The next key to positive autocracy is to listen, learn, and reflect continuously. You have to live life awake. You have to use the power of the mind. Here is where you not only listen and learn from the people around you, you also create those silent pauses for yourself that I was talking about, because you free the mind in order to process better. And finally, you forgive more often. There are recent studies that have shown that forgiveness and compassion create better business results. Now, who would have thought that forgiveness and compassion, touchy-feely words like that, would be more correlated with business success? It is true from a lot of studies that I have seen, and some of them I quote in the book as well. Forgiving is absolutely necessary today. If you want innovation, you will have to allow your people to take risks. You will have to allow people to make mistakes. But if you have a zero mistake tolerance culture, nobody's going to take risks and there's going to be no innovation. So if people try many, many different things and 8 out of them fail, but 2 become breakthrough, you're very good already. So forgiveness is very, very, very important in today's day and age. So those are the 5 keys. You have to practice those 5 keys in order to earn the right to be autocratic. And our data is showing that autocratic leadership is needed. So really, the dance of the naked autocrat is what we are talking about. When it comes to leadership development, we need to move away from look-back competencies to uncovering leadership energy. We have to move away from best practice case studies to practicing the 5 keys of positive autocracy. So that's on the leadership style. The next question is, how do you create a culture of breakthrough innovation in the organization? In the old days, innovation was secretive. The R&D department was in a separate corner of the campus, and you needed a different pass to go there. It was all very secretive. But today, in the open source era, where everything is open, everything is connected, that kind of secrecy, one corner innovation is probably not going to work. How do you innovate more quickly and more frequently? Well, let me give you a quick story. Recently, GE Aviation needed to make planes more fuel efficient. Rather than changing the design of the engine itself, what they found was that if they just made the brackets on which the same engine was mounted 30% lighter, this plane with the same engine would be more fuel efficient. So instead of giving it to their R&D department, what GE did was put out a challenge to all 7.5 billion people on social media. They said, and by the way, there are lots of platforms online that allow you to do that. What they said is anybody who can design a bracket that is 30% lighter may submit their design, and the winning design will get a prize of $20,000. That's it, 20 grand. Guess what? Within just a few months, they got a design that was almost 80% lighter without compromising the integrity of the aircraft. And guess which part of the world that design came from? It came from a town called Bandung in Indonesia. Who would have thought that small town Indonesia would have produced a new design for GE Aviation? That's the world in which we live in. What we need to do to innovate quickly and more frequently is crowdsource externally and internally. The GE example was an example of external crowdsourcing. But you need a very different kind of leadership, a very confident kind of leadership, in order to open up the whole kimono to the whole world and invite co-opetition. That's what crowdsourcing is all about. And here are examples of companies that have been doing crowdsourcing for innovation for quite some time. But that's what the need of the hour is. Talent is not scarce. Uber connectivity and Uber population is making 7.5 billion people available to you. You just have to go and get them. And today, connectivity allows you to do that. And the GE example was just one of them. In the book, you'll find lots more information as to how to do this and which platforms to use, etc. Right? So that's innovation with outsourced, external outsourcing. What about internally? How do you do succession planning? Another big internal process every year is to present to the board a plan which says, yes, we are looking at succession planning and the future generation of leaders. The most common way of doing succession planning is to do a 9-box grid, which is you plot all your people on a graph. One side is performance, one side is potential, and there are 9 boxes, and you plot all the people on that 9-box grid, and the people on the top right-hand side, high performing and high potential, are your future leaders. And presentations are made, plans are made to send these so-called hypos to the best business schools for training, to giving them stretch assignments, to giving them rotational assignments, assigning them an executive coach, etc., etc., etc. After a lot of time and money, 5 years later, these are going to be your future leaders, and the board is convinced. In today's highly connected economy, where things are changing so fast, what is the guarantee that what you're preparing them for 5 years later, those are the skills that are needed? What is the guarantee that these people are going to stay with you? Instead of investing disproportionately on a selected few, what we suggest is that instead of these 9-box grid, invite everybody openly to lead by tapping into their situational passion. How does that work? Well, every year the CEO gives out a challenge to the entire company. Anybody that has any idea to do anything that adds value to the company, reduce cost, increase revenue, innovation, anything, form a team, submit your idea by a certain date. Ideas will be evaluated, and the best ideas will be presented to senior management and the board, and some will be rewarded. Now, anybody and everybody in the company can participate. There's no barrier to entry. Nobody is going to be tapped into the shoulder and said, you are the high potential. You know what tends to happen instead is they do artificial things like assessment centers and psychometric tests to evaluate who is high potential, put them into hypo programs, give them extra work, They're called leadership acceleration programs. So you're supposedly working on these made-up work projects to present to the board and to senior management, and you're expected to become better leaders like that. Your highest performing people are already working 20 hours a day. They're not happy to be in these programs because they say, who told you I have time for made-up work? The ones that are not in these programs are unhappy because they feel they're not selected, so they have no future in the company. Everybody is unhappy. And it costs you a bomb to develop the selected few. Instead, if you let everybody participate in this chairman's challenge or CEO's challenge, the people that raise their hand every year with the newest of ideas, I want to participate, here's my idea. Year after year, they're submitting these proposals. Those are your natural future leaders. They are learning enough as they go, and you're allowing the cream to rise to the top naturally. Natural succession planning, organic succession planning. You do it this way, there's no need for those huge investments. You get a triple bottom line. Proactive and natural leadership development, solving problems and exploiting opportunities at virtually no cost, and the board and senior management develops a real view into the real talent in the organization. So that's what I mean by crowdsourcing externally and internally. In today's Uber-connected and Uber-populated age, those lengthy exercises, or artificial exercises, need to give way to natural exercises like this. Coming back to leadership development, from innovation processes and training programs to teach the 8 steps of innovation and so on, crowdsourced innovation. From managing hypos to crowdsourcing potential, internally and externally. Finally, the third part, which is how do we think about motivation and how do we think about employee engagement. Coming back to what I showed you earlier about what's happening in the 21st century, where everything is changing and so many traditional employees are becoming free agents. An Uber driver is a free agent, drives for Uber but does not work for Uber. So let's take a look into the life of an Uber driver. An Uber driver decides how much he wants to work and how much not to, knows the consequences, realizes that his income depends on how much he actually drives and works, right? If I want to take my wife out to lunch on a particular day and not drive for 2 hours, I know I won't get paid for those 2 hours, but maybe I'll decide to work 2 hours extra in the evening. I decide, right? I get a performance appraisal after each ride, those 5-star ratings, and I understand the consequences of an overall low rating. If I have a very low rating, people are going to cancel me. I can switch to another operator anytime I want, right? If it's not Uber, I may go to Lyft, I may go to anybody else. I have a well-established network of connectivity to run my life from anywhere. So I can be an Uber driver, I can be an Instacart shopper, I can be an Airbnb host all at the same time and still not have a boss. And I can blend rather than balance work and life. That's how much freedom free agents have. So the question is, can companies that still have traditional full-time employees, in this age of freedom, can you treat them the same way? We asked a few questions in our survey, and one of them was this idea that the Gallup organization has made popular over the years, that the biggest linchpin in motivating employees, in an employee's motivation to excel at work, is his or her relationship with their immediate manager. People leave managers, not companies, is what Gallup said. Well, is that still true in the 21st century? So we asked people, between your boss and you, who determines your key reason to perform or excel on the job? And as you can see, the largest category said, I decide. In the age of freedom, not my boss. We used to be very dependent on the boss. I'm not saying Gallup was not right, they were right. But in today's day and age, we don't need the bosses as much. Earlier, you needed to find a good boss, you needed to learn from them as an apprentice, and then develop your career by getting as much knowledge and experience from them. Today, you can get a lot of knowledge from Google. The guru is dead, long live Google. Today, I'm a lot more dependent on myself with all the freedom that I have. Therefore, the role of the manager may have been diminished. That's one. Second question we asked is, what are you more motivated by? Extrinsic things like title, position, money, and power, or intrinsic things like values and purpose? Again, the intrinsic category was the largest across. If you look at global results on boss versus self, consistency across the globe, everybody said, my motivation to excel depends on me, not my boss. I decide. But in the intrinsic versus extrinsic, again, most countries, with the exception of Russia and to some extent Malaysia, in Malaysia the two categories were equal. In Russia, the intrinsic category was the smallest. But everywhere else, intrinsic features as the #1 category for motivation. What does that mean in terms of how we manage and motivate people? Particularly, what does that mean in terms of performance management and goal setting? Well, what are the primary sources of motivation? What we found was people may leave bad managers, but having a good boss is no guarantee for performance either. Intrinsic factors are as important, and to maximize motivation, managers need to get good at uncovering those intrinsic needs of their employees. In terms of managing performance, the standard process in most companies is encouraging all employees to write and develop stretch goals or stretch KPIs, above and beyond goals that they really need to stretch themselves in order to achieve, right? So everybody's encouraged to do that, because only then the company will do well as a whole. Well, as I told you, one thing that was constant throughout, which is the 80-20 rule, right? What does the 80-20 rule say? If you ask everybody, all employees, to write stretch goals, how many of them are actually going to achieve those stretch goals? Only 20%. So why have everybody write stretch goals, right? Why not have people write the minimum goals and say that if you do less than the minimum, you're going to be fired, but that's all I need. And what will happen if you do that is people will choose where they want to be on the bell curve. If I want to do the minimum possible work, I know this is all I need to do to get my bills paid. My rewards will also be commensurate with that. If I want to do good quality work, but I'm not ambitious enough that this is the main purpose of my life, I may want to do average work and get rewarded accordingly. But 20% of your people are going to say, hey, what do you mean by minimum? I want to do maximum and more because I'm ambitious for myself. Whether you have goals or not, whether you have stretch goals or minimum goals, performance is going to fall on that bell curve. Let people decide where they want to be. If you plot the income of Uber drivers in any city, you will find that 20% are high earners, 60% are average earners, 20% are low earners. Can we conclude, looking at this data, that the bottom 20% are bad drivers and are treating their customers badly? No, you cannot. Well, there may be young mothers who are only driving when kids are at school. There may be college students who are only driving on weekends to make some extra money, right? The point is, in today's open economy, people choose where they want to be on the bell curve. They're not necessarily bad people. And by the way, the top 20%, which produce the 80% of the results, they need the other 80% of the people and their support in order to produce those results. Point is, allow them the freedom. So give them minimum instead of stretch goals, let them choose. Yeah? Let them decide the quality and quantity of their work, because you can't force them anyway, right? And how about if we give them unlimited vacations? You can have as much vacation as you want. Now that sounds totally crazy, isn't it? Up until now, what I was saying was still making some sense, but now I've totally lost you, is it? Well, get this. These are just some of the companies that are actually giving unlimited vacation. There's reason for this. The point is that the contract between employer and employee in the open source naked era should be based on honesty. Look, you reap what you sow. You want minimum, you will get paid minimum. You want maximum vacation, there's going to be a cost attached to it, okay? Choice is yours. But allow people to choose on the bell curve. That's the open source era. Whether you like it or not, you're going to have to do that because people have that kind of freedom today. Finally, how do you measure employee engagement and how do you address the gaps? This is my last part. The standard practice is that every year large companies develop a big questionnaire, 100 to 200 items, send it out to all employees, average the data, calculate the top scoring items and the bottom scoring items, and then have management meetings, put some budget and money and initiatives behind what are we going to do this year to prop the numbers, particularly the bottom 10, next year. That's roughly how employee engagement works in your company? I bet you're nodding. Well, here's my question. If 80-20 is true, that 20% of the people are responsible for 80% of the excellence in your organization, what happens to the voice of your top 20% if you average out the data across all employees? Now, I'm not saying that your remaining 80% are not good people. They are, and they're very important. But the top 20 pull the maximum weight. What happens to their voice when you average out the data? It gets drowned under the voice of the other 80, isn't it? And then, if you create initiatives to address employee engagement scores based on that average data, are you promoting excellence or are you promoting mediocrity? Inadvertently, companies are encouraging mediocrity. Just like we've been rewarding followership for leadership all along, we've been pushing mediocrity through these employee surveys, right? The answer to this problem, by the way, is very simple. Ask the 3 segments separately. The same questions. Ask the top 20 separately, ask the middle 60 separately, and ask the bottom 60 separately, bottom 20 separately. Understand the needs of each segment and address them accordingly, because each segment is important to you. But one size does not fit all. So those are some thoughts, some ideas about enterprise leadership as to how management practice needs to change in order to align ourselves with the current times. So basically, what we are saying is, instead of motivating employees, we have to start aligning their pre-existing energy to the work at hand. Instead of just focusing on extrinsic rewards, we need to uncover intrinsic motivation. Instead of managing them closely and breathing down their necks, we need to set them free. That's what the open source naked era is all about. So my friends, I hope this was somewhat useful for you and you enjoyed this presentation. Let me just quickly summarize. Leadership energy trumps competencies and best practice case studies. Having the right values and a worthy purpose is more important than ever before in the naked open source era. Emotional integrity before emotional intelligence. Positive autocracy is the need of the hour. Motivation is self-driven, not by managers anymore. Intrinsic motivation is at least as important as extrinsic. Minimum goals are more effective in driving overall performance rather than stretch goals for everyone, and segmented measurement of employee engagement is an absolute must. Thank you very much, and good luck to you in your leadership journey. Bye-bye.